Yeah, and if I'm going to kind of minimize the chat box, so if you can kind of keep me in tune with that, Michelle, that'd be great.
I will. All right, so let me welcome everyone to our presentation today, Engaging Migrant Preschoolers in STEM. Our guest speaker, Luke, is going to take a minute and introduce himself in just a second. Before he does that, what I want to do is just cover some housekeeping items with you all today. First, because of the large number of participants, you all will remain muted, but feel free to chat in the chat box, send comments back and forth in the chat box, participate as you like using the chat box. And then we also have the question and answer box, which is a separate box. If you hover across the bottom of your screen, it should bring up the Q&A. And if you have specific questions, I'll be monitoring the Q&A. If you try to put the questions in the Q&A box and keep the chat box to comments and interactions of other sorts, that will help us monitor, and then I'll be able to point Luke to some of those questions and stop periodically and give him a chance to answer those. All right. So Luke, go ahead. We're going to turn this over to you.
Excellent. I'll get started. Again, my name is Luke Matlack, and I am my role is a migrant math science coordinator, and I am in Educational Service District 105, which is there's 9 ESDs in the state of Washington, and our ESD region supports about 25 school districts in our specific region. And my work with that is, again, in the migrant department, and support after school programs for migrant students. Current year, I do a lot of work with families, summer school programs, home visiting models, and have done a fair bit of work with our migrant preschoolers and our migrant Head Starts. So I want to say welcome. It's an honor to present, and I work closely with Maggie Mendoza, who does a lot of work with the Preschool Initiative, who's also at RESD in the migrant program. So to start by, welcoming you, I hope that you find the tools and materials that are in this presentation useful, and I want to encourage you to think about whether they can grow yourself, educators that you might work with, that work with migrant preschool children, and also work with families. So you're going to get access to a hyperdoc, a document that has absolutely everything that I'm going to speak to linked to it today, whether it's sites, documents, and the broad use of resources that we've used with supporting migrant preschoolers in STEM and mathematics. So feel free to, we'll be on at the end for some questions as well. So we'll go ahead and get started. So today, we're going to start out in a lot of the professional development that I do is really engaging participants in mathematical discussions and really getting our math brains going a little bit. We're going to talk a little bit about growth mindset with our youngest learners, and the importance behind developing those growth mindset messages, and specifically in mathematics. One tool that we've used is a tool called the Learning Pathways in Numeracy, and we've used that in a variety of different ways with parents and with preschool educators. So we're going to speak a bit to that and talk about early numeracy and subitizing. We'll dive into some STEM resources for preschool that we've used with districts, Head Start programs, parents. There's some really nice tool, Mathematizing Read Alouds, that you'll have access to some guides for that I'll speak to. And then additional resources is really getting into some of my favorite sites, some of my favorite tools, and really just my goal with this presentation was to give you some resources and tools. So hopefully you'll find those helpful. All right, as we move forward here, I have an image up on the screen, and this comes from a site called Math Before Bed, and I believe his name is John Stevens. But we have just a visual, and I stress visuals and how visuals are so important with just getting some math chatter and some mathematical discussions going. So really thinking about how many eggs do you see? How many empty spaces do you see? And how did you count them? So I want to just see if you can come up with a few different ways that you can do that and utilize the chat box for a moment. And Michelle maybe can share out a couple of those for us.
Will do. We'll give folks a couple minutes there to type in their answers. So we're already starting to see that folks group them. They see the 4 and the 3 and then add them together.
Okay, and I'm curious if anyone possibly might have looked at the empty spaces as well. I see 4 plus 3. We have some strategies of seeing a group and then adding on, so counting on a strategy. I see that Mary, it looks like started as an array to get the total and then subtracted. We've got some mathematical vocabulary of rows and columns and subtracted some eggs. Again, rows and columns, multiplied, subtracted. So using these visuals, I appreciate the participation in the chat box. Using those visuals with students, and we're going to go into one more in just a moment, but there are so many different resources that can get even our youngest learners having mathematical conversations and really getting out. One thing that I try to stress with all educators is getting it, not that there's just one way to see things and one correct answer. And that gets into some of the work in our region around districts from kindergarten up doing things with number talks and using images similar to this. So really getting at those conversations. We'll do one more here. Again, this is on the HyperDoc and the link to that. As for the next one, if I can move forward. This comes from some of the work of Christopher Danielson, and these work all the way down to our youngest learners. There's numbers, visuals, shapes. He's got a book with a lot of these, but really thinking about, we've got 4 groups of items, and I'll give you just a minute again in the chat box to think about why one of those groups doesn't belong with the other groups. See what we can come up with. Okay, I'm seeing that one has a group of 5. Oh, I see carrots are the only one on the plate, so they don't belong with the others. What do we have? Ooh, one has a fraction, so we're talking about different parts. All are veggies except for one. The peppers are as a whole, so the peppers, that's a great observation. They're the only one that aren't cut into pieces. One group has more, 3 groups of 4 and 1 of 5. One is not a veggie. One is a fruit. This is fantastic. So other things that we hear oftentimes of the plate, we've got possibly the peppers don't belong because they're the only ones that have a stem. Shapes come into the mix. So really, again, just like before, this really just gets kids talking about mathematics and seeing that there's not just one right answer at times, and that the goal of the which one doesn't belong is there's always a reason for each of them. So the carrots, the zucchini, the pineapple, the peppers. So really, how can we have mathematical reasoning for why those groups do not belong? I even see pineapple pieces are placed horizontally instead of vertically. So as students get older with their mathematical understanding, the language starts to really help. And thinking about, in our region especially, the more that we can develop that productive and receptive language really helps with our kiddos.
Luke,
All
people are
right.
so insightful. I didn't even realize that one of them was vertical versus horizontal.
And that again, I've used this one multiple times, and again, I haven't heard that. And that's the great thing with the using images and some of the which one doesn't belongs, that you folks will come up with things that, wow, I've done this 3 other times and I've never heard that one. So that's fantastic. So just starting to get us thinking a little bit and engaged in how we can, I've used a lot of these visuals in not only in a preschool setting, but also in parent events at the elementary level, and really getting kids confident in seeing things in different ways. As we think about growth mindset, I've got an infographic here, and I tried to make it to where it was a little easier to read, but I believe this is on the Hyperdoc. And the importance of this is through, at the ESD, we've had some work going with Washington STEM and really what we can do to support. They have an emphasis in our state on early mathematics and the importance of mindset around that, and not just mindset with our kiddos, but mindset with the early learning providers and also with parents. So it's really getting at thinking about challenges, how we meet obstacles, effort, criticism, and success. So as I bring these in, thinking about that fixed mindset is you have intelligence and ability are fixed, and they cannot be changed significantly. So having that fixed mindset and thinking about STEM and mathematics, technology, engineering, all those aspects of STEM, versus that intelligence and ability can be developed with effort, with hard work, with strategies, and with different supports. And it really gets at that we can mistakes help grow our brain, and a lot of the current research around perseverance and how we can start to build that and give our youngest learners some of those messages so that they can believe in themselves. And a lot of that comes out of a great deal of research and the importance of early math having such an emphasis on later success academically and in school. So we do some work with really developing preschool educators around mindset. What are some messages, and how are we sending those messages to the kiddos that we work with? And on this slide, this came from, I came across this a few years ago. It's from the Big Life Journal. And even though it says a parent's guide to growth mindset, all in one visual, this is just powerful in how we work with educators. And starting on the left of, how are we praising students? Are we praising them for the strategies, for effort, hard work? So there's that growth mindset praise, and not so much for being smart, gifted, and those would be kind of that fixed mindset types of praise. Give some ideas here on some things that we can practice saying. Getting into the importance of mistakes, one thing that really resonates with me is the word fail. And I think of the word fail as first attempt in learning. You can learn from your mistakes. Mistakes help you improve. And then what are some questions that parents can be asking to try to promote some of this growth mindset. And there's a lot of research from Joe Bowler out of a website called UCube from Stanford University that she's done a lot of work around growth mindset along with Carol Dweck, that your brain's like a muscle. When you learn, your brain grows. When you make mistakes, it does the same thing. So these pieces are more tools for when we've worked with early learning providers in supporting preschool kiddos and through working with parents of how can we give some of these positive messages. So before we kind of move forward from growth mindset, I just wanted to start to just get you thinking about that. Michelle, is there any questions coming up yet around a few of those tools?
I don't have any questions that I see, just kind of a affirmation. Someone else uses Big Life Journal, and I personally love this slide and all the suggestions around growth mindset and how to build that for children. It's so important.
Excellent. Yeah, and again on the HyperDoc, I believe this is linked. I also linked a tool that I've used that comes from the UCube site, and it's in English and Spanish. It's a bit wordy, so we've had some providers modify it a little bit, but it's Joe Bowler really gets at 6 big ideas for parents in mathematics, and it gets into the importance of games. Growth mindset is one of those. Some of the other ones is mistakes and how you can support mistakes. So again, that's a tool that I don't have in the slide deck, but it'll also be on your resource page for you to take a look at. All right. The learning pathways and numeracy, this has been really impactful for all the early learning providers that Maggie and I have worked with, and also with parents. And is how this came about is we've got our Washington State Learning Standards, or the Common Core Standards, that begin at kindergarten and go through 12th grade. And our providers utilize TS Gold, and there was really not a great blend between TS Gold, WaKids, and our current Washington State Standards. So this Pathways document was created. And I'm just going to give you a glimpse of one of the pages of that. And you'll see on the screen that much of what we focus on with our youngest learners is around the counting and cardinality domain. So within this document, there's counting and cardinality, number and operations in base 10, that begins in kindergarten. Operations and algebraic thinking is a page like this. We've got measurement and data and geometry. And the goal of this, and the thing that really has helped our providers, is we've got across the top here that we've got counting in one column. We've got subitizing and early operations, and we'll talk a little about subitizing, and then comparing and ordering. And this has really kind of blended those pieces together, because here we have it from 0 to 36 months. These are the progression of skills that kiddos in that age range would be going through. And
Luke,
in the small column,
sorry.
Yeah.
Is there any chance that you could enlarge this on your screen? I know folks will get a copy of it afterwards, but if you could blow it up just a little bit so they can see it.
Let me see here, hold on. Boy. Wow, I wonder if I should just open it on from the HyperDoc, and that might be better. So should I give that a shot, Michelle?
Sure, sure.
Okay, I'm going to stop share on this just a minute. And give me just a second. Yeah, I was trying to, it is a little, I think this might be a little easier if I can get it to open here. Never great when you can't see and read that. Now, speaking of this document as well, that it's also available fully in Spanish, so we've used it with families as well. So it's coming up. Let me go back to.
And as you're doing that, when folks see it, it's going to be a great resource because, as you mentioned, you're talking about a lot of different domains under the umbrella of numeracy and then divided by or categorized by age group. So it will provide folks with some ideas about what kids in different age groups can be working on under that umbrella of numeracy.
You see that now, Michelle?
Yep, we've got the document, and if you want to scroll down to the chart and see if you can enlarge it from there.
Okay, better, I think.
Still looks, there we go. Yay, thank you.
Looks better?
Yes.
So again, I'm only going to speak to that one domain, counting and cardinality, which is one of the thinking about our 3, 4, and 5-year-olds is one of the biggest one there. But just looking at the category of counting, it lists the progression of skills from 0 to 36 months that kiddos would be learning or know. So we've got verbally counting to 5, maybe incorrect beyond this. As I scroll down, it has our progression for 3 to 4-year-olds and 4 to 5-year-olds, and this even goes up to 5 in kinder and I believe into 1st grade. So is how we work with this with our providers is, say you're having a kiddo that is maybe 4 years old or older, and they verbally count to 5, but they're incorrect beyond that. And we look back and we say, wow, they're okay. They're in the area of 0 to 36 months. We can't just go to getting them to count to 20 until we kind of progress them through doing some counting things, constantly practicing to count to 10. So if we have kiddos that are at a certain level, we can't just jump them there. There's a progression of learning that happens between there. Another great piece of this document or tool is the early learning guideline column. So this has that, this matches the early learning guidelines. And then also right next to that is the TS Gold objective. So if they're verbally counting to 10, if I go over in that column, it's 20A is the TS Gold, and that would be in the yellow and green band. So it really kind of takes, how could we understand where kiddos are at in this progression, but also how can we match it to the early learning guidelines in TS Gold. It's a great tool. We've used it with parents to understand kind of how students progress in counting, and also with our early learning providers to really get at, you know, these are the big skills and this is how they progress. And if a student's not where they need to be, or ahead of where they their age would be, how can we continue to help with that progression? Questions on that? Again, you'll have this document on your on the HyperDoc, and I believe I put the Spanish version. If I didn't, I will do that as well. So I'm going to go back here. Other questions coming up, Michelle?
Nope. Folks just wanted to make sure that they could get a copy of it. And like you said, I assured them that we'll send out that HyperDoc where all the resources that you referenced today will be located for them to be able to access.
Excellent. Let's see if I'm back to, see my screen again, Michelle?
Yep, we can see it. And I don't know if you have the option to share the whole screen, because we're also seeing all the tabs that you have open. It might enlarge the slide if you can share it to full screen. Is it in
Let's
PowerPoint?
see. Google Docs. Let's see. Optimization. I don't know why it's like that. It's in present mode.
That's okay. It's fine.
You okay?
Yep.
All right. So I talked about a few of these, but there's really general pathways of learning at early stages with number sense. Observation will help teachers determine whether children are progressing, stagnant in their learning. So using that again as a tool. The teacher can go back and find where he or she needs to build knowledge for the child to progress, and needing to know where a child is to continue to move them along that progression. I'm wondering, Michelle, in terms of time, I may go past this video, but I want to speak to this for just a minute. That this comes from a person named Graham Fletcher, who's phenomenal. He's created these videos, and again, this is linked. And if I go to, it's about 6 minutes, so I just want to make sure we have time at the end for some questions. And but I'm going to take you here. So Graham Fletcher has done a lot of work with what's called 3-act tasks, and he's not specific to early learning, but he has some progression videos that I have linked, and you should see those here, that doing professional development with early learning providers, we use this early number and counting, and Graham just does a fantastic job of laying out early counting into subitizing, into addition, into subtraction, and really just like that progressions document, he does it very visual with drawings and relating. So I encourage you, if you can, to take a look at that early number and counting, and if you are a provider or provide support to teachers to really support them in that early number and counting. Also, as a parent, he's got addition and subtraction, progression and division, fractions, and just a great clips to really help understand how students learn some of those topics.
And Luke, I know you're
right.
good about this, but could you just describe for folks what subitizing is, since you've used that term a couple of times?
We are going to get there right now in just a second.
Thank you.
Yes. All right, we can see my screen again.
Yes, you're good.
All right, so the big ideas on counting, and I'm going to touch on subitizing. I have it in here. The number word must be learned in sequence. So looking at that document, the big ideas around this, each item in a set is tagged by a unique count. So that's oftentimes referred to as one-to-one correspondence of each item is specific to the count. Cardinality really deals with the last number word in the count and represents that number of objects in a set. And this really gets at, I have a 4-year-old daughter, and she'll count things on the fridge, and she'll say 1, 2, she's touching them and counting them, and she'll say 5 and at the end of 5, or maybe it's 7, and I'll say, how many? And she looks at me for a minute and has to go back and recount them. So she has that, depending on the size of the set, that she's not confident in her final count. And then it can be counted in any order to yield the same cardinal number. So great lead in, Michelle, on subitizing. Some people call it subitizing, some call subitizing. But if we had some dots on the screen, typically that you would, as this flashed up, you automatically knew that there were 4 dots. Didn't have to count them. That's what we refer to as subitizing, is instantly recognizes is what that's called. And it's a big skill that starts with our youngest learners of being able to subitize. As I go to the next slide here, in the next image, this is a little bit different. So I'm not sure how you saw it, but when I see this, I see groups now. So on the last screen, there was 4. And on this one, I see a 6 and 1 in the middle. And you might have seen it a little bit differently, but typically with subitizing, that kiddos can subitize the number of items up to their age. And then anything over 6 is a different type of subitizing, and we actually have to group things. So if there's like 9 random items, you would maybe see 5 on one side and 4 on the other, and you wouldn't immediately see 9. So there's 2 types of subitizing. Perceptual is small collection, not having to count them, and they're all grouped together. So our youngest kiddos are in that, okay, I see 3 and I can recognize 3. As they get a little older, they will start conceptual subitizing, which is seeing parts of like, oh, I saw a 6 and I saw a 1, and again, without counting them. So subitizing is really important to build those part whole and those early addition types of skills. So I just think of subitizing as instantly recognizes. Children can visualize quantity without counting, trying to build those skills. And in that counting in the pathways document, it really has that category of subitizing. Understands part whole. I talked about supporting addition and subtraction, and there are so many great subitizing activities, which I'm going to speak to in just a minute, that help really lay the groundwork for that early numeracy and conceptual understanding. So a few resources here. I provided quite a few to you, and I'll just talk briefly about some. That I love this quote from Albert Einstein: "Play is the highest form of research." And this this document or this game, it's called Tiny Polka Dot, comes from a man named Dan Finkel, and he's from the Seattle area, and he's fantastic. The website is Math for Love, and again linked on your document. And he has developed he's a game designer, and he's also developed some curriculum that's his big ideas are that play is how we need to be teaching mathematics. His overall philosophy is just amazing. And this game we've used with some parent events where they would come and learn to play some of these games, and it would be a multi-session parent event with some of our Migrant Head Start, and they would be facilitated, and at the end the parents we were able to purchase the deck, which is, I believe they're $14 on Amazon, or they could be ordered from Dan. And the fantastic thing about this game is there are all these different suits. So we've got the dark blue cards are all arranged in 10 frames. It's got one that has 0, 1, 2, all the way to 10. We've got dots arranged in a classic dice pattern, dots arranged in a circular pattern. We've got dots in 2 colors, doubles and doubles plus 1. Different sizes of the dots are on the green, and then the numerals from 0 to 10. So you've got 66 of these thick cardboard cards, and there are instructions to play 16 games. And this, if I were to think of a powerhouse to develop counting and cardinality and early addition, this game is amazing. It's got the rule sheets along with that, and on the hyperdoc that you'll have access to is there's a guide for grown-ups, so how to really facilitate some of the games within this deck. Again, the cards are designed really for preschool through about 1st grade, maybe 2nd grade, but I would say a good at least 6 of the games or more you could use with preschool. So there's a guide for grown-ups. There's printable cards that could be printed out, and I believe that they only come with 3 of the suits. There's the directions for the cards in Spanish as well that's attached to the HyperDoc. So I can't say enough about how we've used these cards with families in some of the Migrant Head Start centers. And they're engaging, they're bright, but it really gets at some of those foundational pieces of, wow, kids are going to go into kindergarten working with 10 frames. How can we work with matching dots to numbers and looking at the dice arrangements and matching them to numbers. So I encourage you to take a look at that on Dan Finkel's website. It's also his wife, Catherine, at Math for Love. They've got a lot of resources for this. And there's also videos of kids playing the game and him facilitating some of these games with kiddos. Any questions coming up on that, Michelle?
I don't see any questions, but I would encourage people to type in the chat box some thoughts about how you might use these. I personally love this idea because it engages higher order thinking skills. Very often, you know, I see migrant program staff kind of sit down and say, okay, here's 1 dot. We say 1, and here are 2 dots, and let's count 1, 2, and here's the numeral 2. This takes numeracy in learning your numbers, counting, conceptualization to a whole different level, which is really beneficial for the child. I'm also going to make a connection to literacy. You know, as adult learners or proficient readers, you don't look at 1 letter in a word at a time. And in fact, you don't just look at 1 word at a time. So you're using this notion of grouping also when you're reading to take in several groups of words and spaces at once. And so this particular skill, subitizing, also helps kids with literacy building as well. I can't say enough about it.
Excellent, and thank you for that, Michelle. And I've had the opportunity. We do it. Our STEM director does a huge booth at the Washington State Fair and had these out to work with families. And just for a, you know, you've got the different ways. I mean, looking at the orange, kiddos can often, like when we're counting collections, if we line them up for kids, it's like random ways for them to count and not guiding it all the time. Helps with the development of that subitizing and conceptual subitizing as well. So another piece to this is a book. I'll get to the book in a minute, but I'll give you just a second in the chat. If you could, what questions could we ask kiddos by just looking at this visual? Okay, I'm seeing how many frogs. How many frogs do you see? How many frogs are jumping? Okay, there we go. Let's see what other ones we see here. What are the frogs doing? So yeah, that's building just some background knowledge and connecting. How many ants do you see? How many groups of animals do you see? How many ants on the tree? So great, I'm glad that came up, that it's really looking at some positional words. How many crabs, how many eyes in all? Michelle, they're getting most of them here. This is great. How many frogs in the water? Counting by 2s. How many frogs on lily pads? So we're really looking at where they're at, how many more, how many are on the tree. So this book, and I'll give you the resource in a minute, that I've also used with some of our providers to, and it doesn't even have to be this book, but how can we develop that vocabulary, the counting skills, using some of these images. And this specific book has a whole bunch of these different pictures, and the great thing about it is there's a guide for you there's beginning questions. So we point and count together. There's intermediate questions that we could ask, like how many are ants are on the tree, how many more ants are on the tree than on the ground. So the questions are scaffolded of beginning, intermediate, advanced. The advanced questions really get at being able to instantly recognize. And then there's some challenging questions that are guided right with these pictures. So a tool that really getting some of those counting pieces out visually and practicing those skills of subitizing and one-to-one correspondence. I see even somebody had in here the cattails and clouds in the sky. Fantastic. So the resource here, let's see if I can get there. Here we go. So these come from this book, Math Talk, and I've had the book for quite a while, and I've just found it the most useful that we can support teachers in asking some of those questions that support counting and subitizing. And again, it gives you guides here. Some of them are in black and white and not in color. But I encourage you again to just think about another resource that can support those areas in counting and cardinality. I'm going to dive in a little bit here to some STEM resources as well for you. Much of my work is in math and in science, so how those are integrated. But on that document, I attached a reading that's really about the roots of STEM success. And you'll see in the reading that there's some big findings. That STEM thinking begins in infancy. For our youngest learners to become strong STEM thinkers, they need more play. Again, that's getting at that play-based environment and how we can incorporate these skills through play. STEM amplifies language development. Language enables STEM thinking. Active, self-directed learning builds our STEM skills and interest. Big section of it is really pulling out what we talked about earlier around mindset, and mindset matters to STEM success. And then children's abstract thinking potential can be unlocked through both adult support and executive function skill development. So this was the big pieces within that article that I attached. So I encourage you to really, it just calls out how important STEM is for our youngest learners. Give you just a second. I'll let you take a look at this. This was straight from why an early focus matters, straight from that piece. So I'll give you just a minute, and if you have any comments to that or something that sticks out to you, feel free to use the chat. Great, we have really STEM having that investigation and exploration, the focus on the process, and that comes through. Thanks for that, Michelle, that especially in our distance learning, it's really the shift on that we need to really look at the process over the product. So what's the thinking involved? How are our students going through the process and asking questions and thinking like scientists, experimenting, trying new things? All of those pieces are really how we can build those STEM skills in every day and pretty much everywhere. See if any others come through. So again, this came straight from that article. So, and I encourage you to, again, take a look at that resource that really dives into STEM is very, very important at the earliest of ages, even back before preschool as toddlers. A few other things here, just a graphic here that supports, we have STEAM thinking, the A that is art, but again, what are questions? What are things we observe? Some questions that we could ask. What are you curious about? What do you want to know? What are some discussion pieces? What happened? What did you notice? How could we start to make predictions about things that are happening in the natural world or with what we're working with? And then explore and experiment. So really getting at those big items that we can get kiddos doing outside of our classrooms, but also in our centers as well. All right, Michelle, does this little clip come up on my screen?
Yeah, we see it. You want to go ahead and play it?
Okay, it's just yeah, I'll go ahead and start it. This is really, I'm gonna talk to this, it's called We Engineering. You may have heard of it before, but this is really kind of looking at engineering and STEM in a preschool environment.
Preschoolers are curious about the world around them and ready to take on new challenges. Channel their creativity into problem-solving activities that set them up for success in STEM careers and in life. How do you create a generation of problem solvers? Start early, because today's 3-year-old is tomorrow's engineer. We Engineer is a preschool engineering curriculum with 4 hands-on design challenges. Kids learn that there's more than one way to solve a problem as they look closely at the design world and imagine how they can make it better. As kids complete the We Engineer design challenges, they learn social-emotional skills like how to treat others while working in a group, how to make responsible decisions, and how to share materials. To help educators create today's problem-solving classroom, each We Engineer challenge connects to a typical preschool station like a water or sensory table. We Engineer fits easily into existing routines with lessons that are anchored in a simple 3-step engineering design process created just for preschoolers. We Engineer develops children's understanding of science, everything from forces of nature to loud and soft noises, and balance and stability. Our 3-step engineering design process encourages kids to investigate the world around them. Then they'll take what they've learned and make something that solves a problem. And they'll keep trying when something doesn't work the first time. So why We Engineer? It was created for teachers by teachers and tested in classrooms just like yours. Designed to help preschoolers form valuable 21st century skills, it supports teachers in making connections to science, math, and literacy as they develop engineering thinking. And with We Engineer, kids build the skills that get them ready for STEM and success in school. Find out how We Engineer, as part of a preschool through 8th grade engineering curriculum, can help you create a generation of problem solvers. Talk to your EIE representative today.
All right, so again, at the ESD, we don't advocate specifically for curriculum, but I facilitate a lot of summer programs, both early learning and into elementary, middle school for migrant students. And the EIE curriculum has been used. I actually went out and was trained on it, and it's amazing. It's really, really good. It gets students understanding, what is technology, what are engineers, and gets them right into the engineering design process. And this one just came out. We Engineer, it has a little puppet that's involved, and we have a couple districts in our region in their migrant preschools that have used this, and we incorporated a parent event with the knocking over the block towers, and the teachers loved it. It's very guided at the developmental areas to a classroom. So the block area, there's a piece with sinking and floating. So it's very age appropriate, and it really gets them to think about the world in which they live. Their attitudes about, wow, we are engineers as the students, and then they learn that in this, it's a 3-step engineering design process: explore, create, and improve. And in their other units, it's moves into a 5-step. So I encourage you to look at that. There is a teacher's guide with it. There's a cost, but most everything in the unit is non-consumable for the most part. And there's also a materials kit that you could look at putting together for your classrooms. It really goes off of 4 challenges. There's one around the engineer a fan that can move a ball. They try to make a noise maker. All of these with a little puppet that interjects on how they're engineering. The wrecking ball one was one that I did in a preschool or a kindergarten jumpstart family event that they did at Migrant Jumpstart program, and then the other one's around rafts. So very feasible in a preschool classroom, and just a tool that you can take a look at to really incorporate some engineering and engineering design with our youngest learners. A few things here that this is part of their curriculum as well. It really gets at what are the engineering practices, thinking about problems, exploring materials, improving a design to make it better. We often see this that kids go and in 2 minutes they're done and I'm done, rather than going back of, oh, I tested it, how could I improve on it? So really, what are the practices and what does this look like with young children? A few other resources. We do some collaborating with some other migrant Head Start, seasonal Head Starts. I haven't used a lot of this resource. I'm not sure if others out there have used it as much, but it's a pretty good resource. Peep in the Big Wide World. There's some parent tools there, pieces for educators. There is some Spanish materials that go along with that, but it's really getting at some little units that could be incorporated into a preschool classroom. They've got a full kind of curriculum. I believe it's free. There's some just standalone lessons that can be done, and there's some pieces in here around how we could incorporate a family event. I just put a little snip in this is from the ramps. It gives you day by day of how morning circle, learning centers, what could be adopted with that. There's a guiding activity and then closing activity. So this is kind of an in-depth look on if you were to implement the whole piece. Attached to the HyperDoc, this is some resources that can be done with specifically in the home that's related to STEM. There's some pieces in here that really get at some coding and some things for our young learners as well. So I encourage you to take a peek at that from the HyperDoc. The last piece, this comes from, I believe they've expanded this program a lot, but it's Storytime STEM. And I believe they're out of the University of Washington, and our ESD and some of our migrant facilitators worked with them around how can we mathematize some literature. And I attached, there's literature guides for, these 4 books are really designed at 3 and 4-year-olds. And then we have some other guides that go a little older than that. But just a peek at those, within the guide, it gives you a summary. It's got, well, what are the kind of the literacy components that are called out in this specific book. Really talks about math. Friends join the walk one by one. It provides rich opportunities to support young mathematicians to recognize and name number of items in a set or subitizing. So again, I encourage you, if you have access to a few of these literature books, that these guides, and this is just a portion on this slide, but it calls out page 3, what are some mathematical questions from the book. So it's a kind of a great guide to really be intentional with that integration of literacy and math. So there should be 4 or 6 literature guides also there that have been a great tool of working with our early learning providers to really implement math and have those conversations and integrate math and literacy. As we wind down, a few additional resources that I use a lot. EIE, that's where the We Engineering comes from. K-5 math teaching resources. This is, I know it starts at kinder, but many of the things that we've given home and done some work with families come out of the kinder piece of this. It's a whole bunch of games. Young Mathematicians is a fantastic website with, you can see this number path that's on the screen. LilyPad, jumping on LilyPads, I believe is one of them, but some really strong early learning math connections. Dream is out of Stanford and specific to early learning and preschool. There's a great preschool STEM toolkit that's attached on your document. We have NIAC and then some number path activities. So I just wanted to give you access to some of the things that again, thinking about parents, home visiting, if you're a coach working with preschool educators, some tools here that you don't have to go looking all around for as well. So we have just a little bit of time, and I'd love to hear if there are questions, some comments. Again, I think Michelle's going to send out that document. Everything should have been linked. I make some mistakes, so if there's any issues with links or accessing something, I'll also put my email up on the next slide. So any questions?
Thank you so much, Luke. As folks type their questions into the chat room or the Q&A box, I just want to tell you how much I appreciate what you shared with us today. Looks like we do have a question coming in. This was great stuff. So glad to see that we're sending out the documents. Yes, you'll have access to everything. Thank you, Sarah.
Yeah, and I can let me just pull this up real quick. I can just share possibly. I thought I had my document open, but that's okay.
That's okay. While you're looking for it, let me, I failed to really introduce myself at the beginning. So I just wanted to let folks know that I'm Michelle Cheney with Escort. I'm the coordinator for the Preschool Initiative Consortium. And we were really excited to have you with us today to talk specifically about STEM resources and activities. It is something that the Preschool Initiative and the 9 states involved in that initiative are working on this summer. In fact, I'll hold the book up and then type the information in the chat room, but we're using the Making and Continuing with STEM Activities book this summer, and we've taken 3 of the 25 or so STEM activities in here and created some quick use cards and prepared packets for our consortium states. And we're sending those out. So this year, some of our kiddos are gonna be making boats out of different material like duct tape and aluminum foil. They'll be making, of course, my favorite, the squirrel-proof bird feeder. And that's what we talk about, the investigation and the exploration and all the fun that comes with that. Those resources and our adaptation of what's in the book will be available on our website after the state conduct their use of all those activities. But if anybody would like that in the meantime, just shoot me an email and I'll send you the materials that we've prepared to complement what's in the book. And I'll put all that in the chat room. I see you've got your document.
Michelle is from NIAC, right? I've seen it on NIAC's site.
It is.
So I just have for them up on the screen that when you get access to the document here, that everything should be linked, everything in the right column. growth mindset pieces, the video from Graham Fletcher. I didn't get into it much, but there's a fantastic subitizing guide with some games like Find It Bingo that we've used in our programs. So the subitizing guide, the tiny polka dot, there's a choice grid that was created for families, the game cards in Spanish, some of the EIE and STEM resources here, the literature guides, and then down at the bottom, here's some of those activities that Maggie and I have facilitated and some school readiness types of events. So everything should work. It's a lot of tools that take your time, and I hope you enjoy them.
Thank you for everything, Luke. We will stay on the line just a couple more minutes to process any of the comments or questions that come in, and there are a couple more questions here. And then if anyone has individual questions that you'd like to ask, we'll be here for you. So let's just take a look at some of the other things that folks put in here. Will the slides go out in email? Yes, we'll send everything out in email so you have access to the HyperDoc and the PowerPoint. And Sarah Seamount from Idaho is part of our Preschool Initiative Consortium, is talking about the book walk, book talk lessons around literacy in the preschool, the pre-K learning kits. Is there something simple that we could add for use for summer math? Okay, so I know exactly what Sarah's talking about. They're kind of quick use cards so that service provider and or parent has a set of simple instructions in front of them and the resources and the activities to be able to carry things out. So Luke, maybe that's something that you and I can talk about, putting together a couple of those to send out to folks that were on the webinar and in our Preschool Initiative states around numeracy. I'll share with you what we've done around literacy. Great suggestion.
Okay, yeah, and I think I could have some, I'm not sure what the books they're using, but some of those cards that have that, how you can pull out literacy and math in just small pieces.
Okay, fantastic. So we'll follow up afterwards, and then if we can put something together, I can send it out to everybody in the group. Thanks, Sarah. All right, well, this officially concludes the webinar today. We appreciate your interest and your participation. Like I said, we will stay on the line just a little bit longer in case folks have individual questions. I will follow up with a few things. You will get the PowerPoint, you will get the HyperDoc, and I'm going to send you a link to a short survey. We would love your feedback so that we can always continue to improve. And any ideas that you have about future webinars, the Preschool Initiative has been hosting one a month. So we've got July, August, and September. We're still soliciting ideas. So if you have topics that are of interest to you, just please let us know. Thank you very much. And a special thanks to you, Luke, for agreeing to do this with us today.
Hey, I appreciate it. And I thank you, and everybody stay safe and enjoy your Thursday and weekend.
And Luke, I'm going to turn the recording off, but we'll just hang for a few minutes.